Good evening, everyone, or good morning. If you
Or
happen to be on the
good
other side of the world.
good afternoon,
Good afternoon.
good night,
Good grief.
good Lord. Oh,
So we are talking tonight about the idea of the siddhis, which it's this aspect of yoga that I'm sure all of you know about somewhat and have thought about, have read about, maybe have experienced. And it's we wanted to clarify a little bit about what the siddhis are and how they're experienced and looked at and considered from different perspectives. Because for many of us, when we're brand new to yoga, at least my recollection for myself was when I was first doing yoga and I read about the siddhis, it was sort of confounding and slightly interesting. Like astral projection was something that I thought would be super cool to do, and I think that that's one of these things that can catch our imagination, and then as we get more deeply into practicing yoga on a consistent basis, if we are doing so with the intention of just showing up for the moment, the sort of novelty of the siddhis wears off, and often people don't get to the third chapter of the Yoga Sutra, which is one of the places that they are discussed in depth. And so we kind of either forget about them or people start to hold on to them as we do with other sort of intriguing aspects of life. And so as you start looking at what the siddhis are all about, if you look at some of the tantric texts, they really are the things like levitating and clairvoyance, and in the tantric Buddhist texts, some of those things are what people describe as the siddhis. But then if you look again at them through a closer lens, and we have been looking at Pandit Rajmani's wonderful book on the Yoga Sutra. He's done now 2 chapters of it.
I think he might have.
He might have finished the 3rd.
Yeah.
And he's got such clear and very balanced explanations of some of what the siddhis are and how really truly they are they are things that are natural capacities rather than being extraordinary and out of this world kind of things like astral projection. They are really truly the capacity. They begin with simple capacities of being human and how we are distinguished as humans, or thought to be distinguished with capacities for things like generosity. And so really, as you start looking, and what we wanted to do tonight is to start looking at, well, how do you develop an appreciation for what the siddhis are and work towards understanding the more extraordinary kinds as well as the everyday kinds, because when you can look at them in the big picture rather than just the sort of the idea that they glitter like gold and you think, oh good, if only I could
get some,
I'd be good. And we'll talk about what some of the extraordinary ones are. But as you start looking at it, what becomes more and more clear is that you really have to start with the basic understanding of avidya, or ignorance, and the tendencies of mind to become sort of entrapped by the thought process, but more so even by being taken off track by the senses. So the mind like perceives things through the senses, and then gets lost in all kinds of mischief as well as
suffering
and
imagination
and sort of false satisfaction. So it's an interesting thing, and a place to start really is by looking at the 8 limbs and how do we progress through the 8 limbs and find our way through to this state of extreme concentration that then can lead to the siddhis, right?
Yeah. Good. I was thinking of your reading of a couple of verses, and I'll just do the Sanskrit for one of them. And this is from the Yogacaravali, which is, of course, a basic text for Ashtangis, because Vande Guru Nam Charanarvinde is the first verse, and so it is everyone's duty to. And the Yogacaravali is very rarely actually studied by most of the people I know who have an interest in Ashtanga yoga.
But an interesting part about the Yogacaravali is the first verse.
Yeah, the first verse is fascinating. But I'm not going to read the first verse, because everybody's heard that. So verse 27, so we're getting near the end of it. There are only 29 verses, so if you want to go through a light study of light. Prakashamano paramatma bano nasyatya vidyati me samaste aho buddha nimala drishtayopi kinchana pashyanti jagat samagram. And so, translation, the shining of the effulgent Paramatma totally destroys the darkness of ignorance. Aho, which is, oh, wonder. So it's like, the Buddhas, the awakened ones, translated, but, maybe a subtle reference to Buddhism. The Buddhas have no fault, who have no fault in their seeing, see not a thing in this whole world. Okay? And then the next verse, when will it be obtained, that perfection of manolayam samadhi? And so manolayam means the, laya is kind of the dissolution, disappearance of the mind. In the caves of Sri Shringagiri. And so this is the beautiful rocky peaks, which are visualized in practice on the crown of the head. And so if you've ever looked at any nice art, particularly of deities, or they always have these amazing crowns, perhaps multiple heads, which is nice. And it also is a location of the Shankaracharya Mat in Mysore, or north of Mysore.
Yeah.
Out in the jungles there. And so in the caves of Sri Shringagiri, where the creepers intertwining with my limbs, as the birds build their nests in my ears. Okay. And so the vision of, you're sitting there, and you occasionally actually see sadhus in India that this is happening to, but all the time you'll see statues in old temples, particularly in Southeast Asia, where, that are a few hundred years old, or even a couple of thousands of years old or older, and the trees have taken over, and the statue will be there, but the trees will have grown completely around it, and it's completely engulfed. And then, so I guess trees and creepers, and then in the ears of the person sitting there, the birds are building nests. Okay. And this, of course, has a subtle metaphorical reference to nada, or the ability to really listen to what is considered Daivi Shakti, or divine energy. And this is the theme of, and so nada is not considered ordinary sound, although it's considered perception of the senses without the mind jumping into an immediate story about them, like identifying, oh, that is a bird, or that's a whale, that's a dolphin, that's an airplane, which we naturally do. But with practice, you can just go, and just the sound itself, and sound is intended to include all of the other senses. So sound being the corresponding to the higher chakras, particularly the throat. Then you have touch, and then what are the others? Oh, sensation, or vision. Excuse me, I forget them, even though I'm doing them. So you have vision, you have sound,
Smell.
you have taste and smell. Mm-hmm. Smell being the, and all of these correspond to what are called marma points, or marma mudras, that are used in the internal yoga practice. And these are all points that balance the prana in the body, so that you're able to observe, or just, I don't know if you're able to observe sensation without running off immediately into a story about it.
So it's almost an absorption. So you're absorbed by this, and there are these different marma points that you can, and the wonderful thing about this verse is that this image of being so still and so absorbed by just being present there, that the birds have nested in your ears, and you're just part of everything else. And you can achieve that through visions, visualization like this, or through focusing on those marma points, like the navel or the heart, or we were reading about the corners of the eyes.
The inner corners of the eyes here.
Yeah.
Or here, of course.
Between the eyebrows, or the third eye.
Or, all of the, and in the mouth, which I won't show you, I'll spare you that, but the, all of these, and because and then a lot of the beautiful images and stuff, the metaphors of the marma points will then stimulate, some associations you might have with experiences like that. And you'll just so if you've ever been stunned by the beauty of, birds and trees, or that your body has merged with. And so a lot of the practice is to start there. And so generally in our practice, we start with, being observant, and then, with mantra or some kind of setting of intention, anything that, and it varies from person to person slightly. Mm-hmm. There are all kinds of things. It could be your favorite song. It could be your, going outside, and then you go, And then, having set the intention, then you begin the internal practice, which takes you systematically through all of the different layers of the body, and starts balancing everything, left and right, front to back, up and down, past and future, around the mysterious, what we'll call the central channel. So even the image of the central channel, that is processed and becomes just this clear light. Mm-hmm. And so in the Yoga Sutra, there are traditionally Ashtanga, or 8 limbs, and everyone knows them, but I'll just do Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. And we're all somewhat familiar with them. We've had, at least a taste of probably all of them. And one of the interesting transitions between the initial practices, which are considered to be the first 5 limbs, although is the transition into what's called samyama. And samyama is the last 3 limbs, which are the ability to concentrate your mind, really concentrate it, to the point where traditionally one is able to focus for quite a number of seconds and eventually a number of minutes. So even 8-9 minutes is considered well, that's a decent concentration of the mind. And then once you are able to focus the mind, and it requires kind of that effort, like you're ignoring everything else initially, and then you go, then the next stage is extremely profound. That's when you go into meditation, dhyana, and you start to see the interconnectedness, or you see the background of everything that's being focused on. In other words, you have a deep view of it as interconnected, and in that way, there's no longer a conflict. Mm-hmm. There's not I have to focus my mind and be good, or I swear I'll focus my mind so that I'll get SIddhis, so that I'll, all of these, whatever the dialogue or trialogue goes, that's another joke coming. But that's considered, and so the dhyana is considered an extremely profound state, because you actually get into like the stunning. And by that time, we left pranayama long ago. Prior to that, you were like, already the breath would stop naturally.
And yet it is deeply embodied. And this is this sort of aspect of the practices that Richard and I have been really focusing on for the last year or so, is to how do we, as practitioners, bring awareness to the process of embodiment in something like a deep meditation. Mm-hmm. So that when we talk about meditation, or when you were saying you see this, that, and the other, that's how it begins. But then that's what's so beautiful about this verse from the Yogacaravali, is that there is this beginning part where it is this function of purposely focusing the mind, but then it becomes something beyond that, but it is also embodied. It is also something that you have the physical embodied experience of without naming it. And as you all know, as soon as you name it, you come out of it. You've defined it, you've codified it, it's no longer fluid. And so it's this deep process that you are part of in that deep meditation, theoretically, right before the samadhi that then precedes the ability to really go deeply into the siddhis.
Yeah, to get to these last 3 samyama, the 3 together are all called samyama. One has to have deepened and basically achieved the whole process of embodiment, mm-hmm. in which your body isn't your body, it's the body. It is a manifestation of the, depending on what term you want to use, it is the awe, it is the clear light, it's the goddess, Spanda Shakti, it's the Paramatman, it's just like, it's stunning. And you feel it in the sense of, so the senses are no longer trapped in the idea of a sense object. Mm-hmm. But that happens in the next stage, where you're so absorbed in meditation that all of a sudden, and it doesn't come from anything you do, it comes just from the nature of the entire it's your nature or it's the nature of nature, like Mother Nature, or it's the nature of reality, or whatever word it's the nature of God or Goddess, or it's the nature of everything. And that nature is emptiness. And so the Yoga Sutra defines it as it is empty of, in samadhi, it is empty of self-form, swarupa. Everything is perceived as emptiness. And that is like, and so, and then of course, then samadhi is later looked at very closely because it's almost like you slip into the stream of emptiness, but then due to samskara, due to just the nature of that which you've just seen through, and oftentimes we reemerge, further downstream, and we reemerge, and it's like, oh, there we are, and our brief experience has made us more sensitive to situations, or has awakened some kind of memory from a past life that makes, where all of a sudden we've got to deal with who knows what. We all have news stories, when this happens. But we go back, and the interesting thing, though, I can't even say the progression of the Yoga Sutra, but I will, is that when you're doing pranayama, in the Yoga Sutra, in some sense, you're almost enlightened before you start the pranayama if you're really good at asana. Because if you're really good at asana, you've started out, with good posture, which I highly endorse, sitting straight. And then you're sthira, which means you're grounded. And that grounding can be all the way, profoundly, I am merged with, I am Mother Nature. The body is nature. It is the universe. And then you're sukha, meaning you have a good hole at the center, which means, it's the word for happiness, but it means having a hole in the center of the wheel of existence, which would be a hole at the center, And then,
and it's not a void, it's a vastness.
Yeah, it makes everything, it's just like when you, all of a sudden your car works correctly because the mechanic they got the wheels on correctly. And like, wow. And then you experience the total release of all effort, or which is the sense of, I got to do something. And then the mind naturally meditates, or is absorbed in infinity. So whatever you're observing in a good yoga posture, the mind is absorbed in infinity. And then from this, the mind is ready for pranayama. And so then they say, well, pranayama comes, there are four stages of pranayama. And I think one is external. And this is besides inhaling and exhaling. That's already assumed that you're inhaling and exhaling. But you can do it with one external, which means a sense of proprioception of your immediate world around you, which is very practical. And then esoterically, they say that, and so you're extremely aware of, the field around the body, 12 finger widths out. So that's how far out your breath goes, it's 12 finger widths, or above the crown of the head, 12. Below, all around, you feel that proprioceptive quality. And then, so that's the first pranayama, and that will deal with everything you perceive in all directions. You're dealing with other beings, like if I think, oh, everything in front of me, and so you have to kind of, and if you imagine like sensation appropriate that's in front of me, and if you have an association with, if there's something in front of you, like your television or your phone or police station or whatever, you've got to deal with those relationships or your perception of all things as being separate objects. And then behind you, to the left, to the right, to the up, to the down, to the past and the future. And then you move into the internal stage of the pranayama. And internal is basically the awareness around the balancing of the central channel. You know, like, what do I feel internally? And this is, of course, dealing with what we call the marma points, mudras, bandhas, nadis, channels, chakras, you know, all of those things that we like to imagine. Okay? And so then to balance them is the next phase of the pranayama, and made much more possible because you did the external, then the internal. Okay.
And through the breath, you can do this.
Yeah, and with the breath.
Yeah.
And that's just amazing. Breath is amazing stuff. And by breath, then we've then defined inhaling and exhaling. But then the third one is the kumbhaka, or this natural cessation of the movement of breath, which comes in various stages. And at first, you know, of course, you are cultivating it deliberately, where you, having set up the body nicely, you'll notice, oh, that's a long breath, or that's a short breath. And, you know, the early stages of pranayama, you will, you know, chant 6 of your favorite mantra while you're inhaling, and 25 of your mantra while you're holding your breath, and then 20 of your, you know, and you really, then there are all these educational patterns that different people go through. And this is extremely helpful, because if you do it without having observed, you know, the rest of the introduction, you're doing it without like being mean to yourself or thinking it's some kind of sporting event and that you're in some stadium where, you know, the police are firing tear gas at the yoga Olympics, which hopefully are not manifesting this year. And so then you start to experience, you know, the natural kumbhakas, and eventually through that you start to experience where the breath is neither going in nor out, and the kumbhaka is merely the absorption, and you're not inhaling or exhaling, and it's the beginning of what's considered to be the 4th pranayama, which they call turiya. And sometimes turiya is referred to as, you know, what yoga nidra, in which you just have the spontaneous sensations and absorption. And there are ways of training that, of going between the third stage and the 4th stage, back and forth. But eventually you get to what they consider to be the 4th stage of pranayama, and that this is without any, it's a total sense of satisfaction, is how it's described. It's just like, sweet. And it's just like you met, you know, somebody really sweet and nice, and it's not like a theoretical thing, and so the mind starts to stop, stunned. So if the breath is stunned, so the mind is stunned, because mind always moves with prana. Prana always moves with mind. They are inseparable. Prana, chitta, chitta, prana, back and forth. And prana moves chitta, chitta moves prana. And this is the kind of the secret that, you know, we talk about it all the time, but it still remains a secret. It's like, but that's why you got to test it out. And so then what happens then is, they say, it then removes the veil or the covering of light. And that means the covering over light. And so they consider like over the light of and by the light they mean reality. They mean the clear light. They mean
infinity. Yeah.
Yeah, they mean, you know what I mean. uh, and so that's considered to have a veil over it, which is the veil basically of ignorance. And so it removes that veil, and then you experience what is called Pratyahara, which is the fifth limb, and the limb that isn't talked about that much. There's just like 3 verses about it. And this is the limb of Pratyahara, in which there is no grasping at all of sense objects.
And it's not an effort. It's effortless. It's not the effort to not grasp. That's
Back in
the training stages. It's again this idea of the birds building nests in your ears. It's this thing that happens because you have really stilled the mind, or the mind has become stilled. It has dropped into the heart or dropped into some part of the body that where it is no longer tempted by the sense objects that the nature of mind is to be tempted by those things all the time.
The mind creates them, and then
to immediately pull you out of this state of steadiness and then separate you out. So as soon as you have these flashes of deeper meditation or interconnectedness or whatever, and then the mind names it, or a bird chirps outside the room, then the mind is just this agile aspect of our being, and which is great, except for the fact that it's like, it goes for the glitter, and it pulls you off, and we become just perpetually separated in the state of avidya. We become, there is a moment where there is interconnectedness, and immediately we're disconnected.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely natural. That's the state of being human, and that's why we gradually do these practices.
Because there's a samskara that's left by the nirodha samskara,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just like the patterning in the nervous system, in the chakras and the nadis, in the fascia of the body. There's that pattern, but the pattern isn't the actual experience, but it's almost like the deep mind has read, oh, that's so and so, and that's the goddess, that's Mother Nature, that's science, that's all of these amazing things, that's the universe, or that's and so then you return, and it's basically ruins your fun in life. That's the yoga ruins your life theory, because then even though your ego has returned and you're thinking, well, now I'm going to, really become powerful. I'll take over Indra. I'll take over this universe. At least I'll take over this, this country. I'll take over Asia, at least, if not Europe, and then I'll take. Okay, we know all these scenarios that. If it's not the autocrat, it's the priests or the religious, the counselors of the autocrats who empower them. And this is a traditional pattern. But the Pratyahara is literally the ability, and it's considered traditionally that one will stay for 8 or 9 minutes in awe, in which there is breath, but there isn't breath. In other words, the absorption is so deep that there's absolutely a total, the body is just like totally relaxed, but it can have totally good posture, which is like really hard for even yoga people to imagine. You're sitting there, it's almost like a lot of the statues of deities. You think, that's some really good posture, with 4 arms, but they're smiling. and there's absolutely no effort to maintain that. And so this is that stage of Pratyahara.
And the key being the stillness of mind, in addition to the stillness of breath. So the steadiness and the stillness of mind, which is interesting to me in terms of pranayama, because people, say, well, I, was able to manipulate my breath in this way and hold it and have a kumbhaka of this length, etc. And as you move through this process towards the siddhis, what you discover is that holding the breath is not what is going to get you there, because what gets you there is the stillness of mind.
Yeah, there's nobody to hold it.
There's
when the
nobody to
mind
hold
is
it.
quiet, that means subject, object, and the confusion of the two, and the any kind of distinction between subject and object being good or bad, and the self, all of that is just like it's suspended, and it's just not a problem. And so the idea is that this is it's really an experience of almost according to the esoteric interpretations, you're basically enlightened at that point, although you wouldn't claim that. Yeah. Who's enlightened? Because you're not interested in proclaiming that to people, and so you're not interested in
or proclaiming it really to yourself.
Because
it's irrelevant.
It's too sweet. It's too nice a thing. And this then is the precursor for the proper practice of dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, which is then considered the primary tool of Ashtanga yoga. That's just the book, right? Okay, and so then you have samyama, and it's you're a qualified beginner in this endless path of being just like the endless path that in mythology, all of the bodhisattvas follow, or all of the avatars or incarnations of various, on many different platforms and planets, not only this one. And their work is then the service of all of the beings. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of beings out there, and they take a joy in being of service. And so the siddhis are then their tool to be of service. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like that grasping.
And so the preliminary siddhis are these capacities that we have that are human capacities. I should look at that list that's hidden.
Hidden?
Yeah.
Oh, here's the hidden list.
And so, they're just things like we mentioned where you have...
those, and then those are the proper siddhis.
That you have clarity, that you have knowledge without doubt. In other words, it's a deep connection. They're all deep, they're all embodied. They're all these feeling states or feeling states where and that's why Richard and I...
They're awesome states.
Yeah, we talk about truth and the idea of, the erosion of truth these days being bad for the world, and this idea of knowledge that is without doubt is not one, well, I know 2 + 2 = 4. That's one kind of it, of knowledge that you might have without doubt, but really this truth of connection, the ability to communicate and put into words is another one of these little preliminary siddhis that you get when you finally start having this sense of absorption, where you are able to communicate because you have the capacity to put name and form together and then
Yeah.
The next step being that you don't hold it tightly like a weapon, but that it becomes something that is
Yeah.
profoundly shared.
Yeah, so one of the siddhis is you just get better at all the things that mind does, which is to name things. You know, oh, well, you don't want to get name and form confused, nama and rupa, but you're much faster at naming, you know, you can name them and then keep track of the names. It's so like you've gotten an upgrade uh, in your operating system. And even though name, and you can be skillful in naming things, so you can then see them in context, so then you can use the knowledge and experiment contextually to get more information. So you have what they call the potential of learning all of these different things gradually, just like in science. And so you take your samyama and your duty, or your, it's not your duty, that's a depressive word. Your
That's an old
privilege.
samskara of yours.
Yeah, I got it. Oh,
Get rid of that
so
one.
beaten down by it. You, the excitement is you take samyama wherever you go. Okay, it's like you take it off your sticky mat even, and then any kind of situation or person or you then can focus on it, dharana, and then you go into dhyana where you start to see its constructions in this endless depth, in its that everything is the background, and then to become awestruck and to feel that sense of love or clear light. And so you do that, and you do it with stars in the sky, you do it with microscopes, telescopes. What else do people use? Oh, you can do it with artificial intelligence, with computer science. You can do it with anthropology. You can do it with history. You can do it with language.
Mythology and
You can do it
storytelling.
with storytelling.
Singing.
You could do music.
Yeah.
Oh,
Art.
Yeah, because we're all into music, art, and religious things, and so one of the, and this would be a theory that human beings and are by nature religion. Religion itself is the human thing, and this, of course, completely destroys most definitions, and so secular humanism would be a religion. Atheism is a religion because they're all metaphysical assumptions, but you don't have an attachment to their being true. You just want to go, wow, look at that amazing assumption. And so many of them are more profound than we know. And you're taking that yogic skill of samyama, which is the same as the yogic skill of asana, to actually experience infinity.
And to experience the other. And to interface with the other. And so a couple of the other small siddhis are, the ability to really, and the desire, the motivation to go deeply into study and to experience this tenderness and connectedness of the heart to everything else. And it's not like something that has to be practiced, it's something that happens, that automatically happens, where the tenderness, the spaciousness, the connectedness through the heart starts to be part of the fuel that allows you to, the siddhis themselves, the concentration itself, to build. Because you are slowly having moments more and more frequently where the process of avidya has slipped out of your hands for a moment before you have suddenly said, oh my God, I'm too connected to others. And then one of the last ones that I love is the idea of generosity, which is spoken of as this capacity, or a beginning siddhi, the capacity to give what is yours to others and to experience the pure bliss and joy of doing that, to see that this ability to give and to really what eventually leads to sacrifice, that is the greatest joy and the root of happiness. And you feel it through all these other channels of the siddhis themselves. And you get there by this sort of practice of, the fourth pranayama that we were just talking about. That's how you kind of cultivate that.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
particularly at our beginning stage.
Yes.
Once we sit straight and and once we practice, the ahimsa and all those yamas and niyamas. And so should we open it up?
Well, yeah, and do you want to talk about those? Then in the third chapter of the Yoga Sutra is where some of the more unusual sort of things that we talked about at the very beginning of the talk, where, you, as this young, new person to yoga, you start reading about all these siddhis and you think, oh, wow, I'm going to be able to levitate. I'm going to be able to shrink into these tiny space or expand to the edges of the universe. And so there are categories of the sort of these magical powers that theoretically come, but they are all really extensions of what we were just talking about, these capacities to be connected and to be part of something bigger than yourself. And they fall into categories like, things having to do with your body, or things having to do with clairvoyance types of things, or manifestation of things. And they're exciting to think about. But it's also spoken of, and I think it's in the Yoga Sutra, almost either right before or right after they're listed in the third chapter, that these are very private things, that they are not things that one does and then says, hey, look at me, I'm floating. And so when people have tried to understand them and try to study them, it becomes slightly difficult, because to really be doing them properly, it's something that you don't flaunt, that you don't show off about or feel indulgent about, because it is the epitome of of having let go of avidya, right?
Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking of one that's if you do samyama on Uddana Vayu. So Uddana Vayu is one of the 5 pranas, and that's the one that goes from your heart up to this point above the crown of the head, and it's considered the channel of nectar, the Amrita Nadi, and it is it's up, and I like to think of it as intrinsic dignity. In other words, you feel this, and when you feel the Uddana Vayu, and the tongue and the palate automatically take the mind into a concentration. They say that it gives you the siddhi of, and this is the one people interpret as being able to levitate or to float. And so there are all of these tricks that sadhus do in India to appear as, they build these little seats, on the sides of things.
They're magicians.
Yeah, they're like very talented magicians. So it looks like they're floating as they sit there, and they have their robe in such a way that you can't see that it's attached to a wall next to you. But the floating actually refers to, if I have this experience of intrinsic dignity, and that means I don't rely, it's like you're the true aristocrat, it's like, you're not relying on people approving of you in order to and so you're in a sense floating as you go around experiencing normal interactions with people or interactions with the environment, even interactions with, as you go hiking in nature and you come across, difficulty in the forest or flooding or lightning or thunder or something, you have that tendency to be, and which is I don't know if that communicated, but you're floating. And so that's the meditation. So you do samyama, which is this deep samadhi on what's called the nectar channel, which is the channel that compassion and humor flows in, clear light. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, in esoteric yoga or tantra or kundalini, this is almost one of the primary meditations. And then from that, you're able to drop it down through all of the through the pelvic floor, the navel, and all of the different other forms of prana to really awaken into the central channel. But people always interpret that, if you do samyama on udana, then you'll be able to levitate. And it's kind of, I think, you see that.
Yeah. And so we wanted to kind of leave you with the idea that that the siddhis are this wonderful, on some levels, this extraordinary aspect of the practice. But then on another level, they are what make the practice, in a sense, completely ordinary.
Yeah.
And to be able to hold both of those sides to understanding the practice is really...
Yeah. Completely ordinary would be the fact that you are not, that you're letting it go, mm-hmm. letting it shine. And completely extraordinary is the fact that it is the miracle of creative energy, of Mother Nature, of the universe, of mind, of whatever all this is going on around us that we often ignore. That's amazing. And then what's ordinary is the fact that there's empty of self-form, therefore let it go and it'll shine. And so it has that funny meaning. Yeah. Anyway, we got it.
Yeah.
What we done? Yeah.
So we hope this shed a little light on things for you, and as much as anything, got what could be a seed to remind you to slow down the practices and to really look at this notion with, say, the pranayama practices that are stillness of mind, which is so hard to get in this day and age, that any taste of it that you can get it's like nectar. It is really the juice of these practices. It will feed you so well and really start nourishing your these capacities of sort of the smaller siddhis that we talked about, that are the aspects of being human that make it wonderful to be human rather than torturous to be human. And we I mentioned that we've been working on this project on putting into words how one can really experience embodiment in various different ways. And a thought we had, this is something that I have been playing with, that I will share with you in terms of a way of focusing the mind that isn't, although the pranayama practices are really important, and the fourth pranayama practice is very, very much a step that you can take along the way. But there are also things you can just do sort of in a split second or for a minute or two here and there. And one I've been playing with is to experience or to bring your awareness into something that you that makes you experience beauty. Maybe a sunset, or maybe a beautiful flower, something that just catches your imagination, not like, oh, I'm going to look for the most beautiful cloth or the most beautiful peach that I might find, but something that just suddenly captures your imagination, and pause with that experience of what it actually feels like to be in resonance, to have that aesthetic connection with something outside of yourself, and not to, and so to just over the course of the next week or so, if you happen to notice something beautiful, just to pause for a moment and bring your awareness to the sensations that you are experiencing that make that beauty sort of register with you, resonate with you. And it doesn't work if it's like a beautiful person that you love, because then there's too much baggage along with that. It had, it really, maybe for other people not, but but something. And what made me think of it was, as a kid, I used to collect seashells, and I was, tend to be a little OCD, and so I wanted all of the shells to be perfect, and if they even had a tiny little chip, I wouldn't pick them up. And then after a period of time of having all these perfect shells, at one point I saw this corner of what was called a turkey wing shell, and I picked it up, and it was just, it's one with mother of pearl on the inside of it, and it was just stunning. And I remember that moment vividly from the time I was like 5 years old, where it was, in a sense, far more beautiful than the object that I had created in my mind as, this is what beauty is. Yeah. And so to notice that those moments happen, and to simply just pause when they do, and it's almost like swallowing water, rather than just putting water in your mouth and spitting it back out again, but swallowing the experience and then letting it go, like not making a big deal out of it. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of thing that we can do in addition to the formal practices that we all do of the asana and pranayama and meditation. So that's just a thought. Mm-hmm. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll leave people.
We'll leave you with this, and we thank you so much for coming this evening, and for tuning in. And for any of you who wish to stay a little longer, we're here as long as you like to ask questions if there are any. But thank you all so much.